CDs. What does CD stand for? Certificate of deposit. In our office, that's not what we call them. We call them certificates of disappointment. Okay, and why do I say that? Right now, the average rate for a CD of a year or less is under 1%. That's right now. Can you get a higher rate on a CD? Absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, we like CDs from the standpoint that they're safe, right? FDIC insured. So basically what a CD does, it pays you a rate of return, a rate of interest for a stipulated period of time, and that's all good, okay? However, the rates that they're paying are abysmal, really, really low, okay? So everybody remember 1983, 84, 85? What were the rates on CDs? 13, 14, 20% in some cases. And I talked to a lot of clients. And what did they say? I've got a foolproof plan. I'm going to retire. I'm going to put all my monies in CDs. I can't lose anything. And I'm going to live off the earnings. How do you like the prospect of living off of less than 1%? Okay, not such a good plan anymore, right? So what we're going to do is just talk about basically why we call them certificates of disappointment. And just for a point of conversation, I'm going to assume that you can get a 3% return. Can everybody see this? Because I've got some new markers. Everybody in the back? Okay. I'm going to assume a 3% return on a CD, which is pretty tough to get right now, but let's just assume you can get 3%. And what's the first thing that happens with the earnings on CDs? They're taxable, right? So whether you actually get a check or whether you let them just accrue in your certificate of deposit, that's taxable income to you. By the way, how does that affect your Social Security? Higher provisional income, more tax on your Social Security, okay? So CDs don't solve the problem of having your provisional income go up. That's number one. Number two, you've got to pay income tax on anything you earn on the certificate. So let's just assume, based on your tax rate, you're paying taxes on this. Because of that, you're not making 3%, you're making 2 to 2.5% on the earnings, starting at 3%, because you got to pay tax on it, okay? But that's not the last part of what takes a chunk out of your return. What else do we have to think about? Inflation. I swear I didn't give him all the answers before the meeting, okay? Inflation. So, average rate of inflation for the last 10 or 15 years is 2 to 4%. We can argue that, depends. You have cars, what's gas doing, what's the housing market doing, how about your different expenses that you incur on an ongoing basis. But when you factor in inflation, now we're not making 2 or 2.5. Let's assume we're making something in the range of 1.5. Okay, net after taxes and after inflation. Again, we can argue whether this should be 1.75 or 2 or whatever. The point is, it's probably below what the current rate of inflation is. So what that means is, the likelihood is, at the end of the year, the money you have invested in certificates of deposit don't have the same purchasing power that you had at the start of the year. Does that make sense? So even with the earnings, after you're done paying taxes and inflation, you're probably less than where you were at the start of the year. My mom had a bunch of CDs in the early 90s with Harris Bank, and she was making like 0.4%. And I said, Mom, we got to do something different, okay? Problem is there weren't a lot of alternatives when we were looking at that for her. So, what did we not even discuss yet? How about medical inflation? Okay, so we're talking just kind of run-of-the-mill lifestyle inflation. Anybody want to guess what the medical inflation rate's been running? 18%. Now again, this depends somebody in a nursing home, how high are your medical expenses, what's going on with your particular type of health insurance. But at the end of the day, whatever you want to talk about, 10%, 15%, 20% for medical inflation, I think you can see that your net return on CDs is not real good. That's why we call them certificates of disappointment. Now here's the thing. CDs have some wonderful aspects to them, mainly that they're safe. But if you have a over percentage of your assets in CDs, chances are you're losing purchasing power every single year. So people will say to me, well, Gary, shouldn't my CPA doing my tax returns be talking to me about this? And I'd like to say yes, because I'm a CPA and I want us all to be super diligent. But the reality is at this time of year, I have to tell you, our heads are going in about 27 different directions. And I don't even have a large tax practice anymore. But what I have is plenty distracting, okay? So we're so busy getting tax returns hammered out, the last thing we're really doing is doing a large amount of analysis on what kinds of investments you have, unless you ask us to do that. And most of the time, you just want to know what? How much am I getting back? Or how much do I owe? How does the new tax law affect me? That's what you want to know. That's what the CPAs are doing. So, again, we're going to give you the opportunity to come in for a conversation if you'd like. And one of the things we can look at is whether you're maximizing your opportunity in your own investment diversification and give you some alternatives to this.